All right, everyone, it's Monday afternoon, July 7th. Welcome to the SEC in 60. This is our 12th edition. We've been running strong for 12 weeks. No Chad Niebling of SEC Sports Insider this afternoon. No Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama. I am the lone voice of SEC in 60 with 7 weeks to go before we start talking Texas A&M and South Carolina. So think about it, SEC football fans. 7 weeks from today, we will be looking straight at that Thursday night matchup in Columbia with South Carolina taking on Texas A&M. We also have a number of great games that Saturday with LSU and Wisconsin, the game that I really need to move mountains and do everything I possibly can to see that game, LSU and Wisconsin. That is the one game that I am the most amped and pumped to see in week one involving the SEC and really the entire slate of college football games on that opening weekend. But again, for the SEC Network, for the SEC to have that grand stage in week one as they did last week or last year in 2013 with Vanderbilt and Ole Miss on that opening Thursday night. It's going to be South Carolina and Texas A&M, and we're highlighting the Aggies quarterback position today. So here's the rundown. This is the SEC in 60. Again, I'm Mark Rogers of Mark Rogers TV. We've been going strong for 12 weeks. We're live here every Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern and noon Central to bring you nothing but SEC football. That's all we talk about. So dive back into the 11 previous episodes, and you're not going to see outdated material. We're talking about all the preparation for this fall. We went through every team in the SEC through spring practice, our spring recaps going again into fall practice. We have carved out all the schedules. We started with, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri. We're looking at Georgia today. Going to check out the Bulldogs schedule. If you'd like to see my take on every schedule, not just in the SEC, but every schedule in college football for 2014, I've started a series looking at every Power 5 schedule. I started in the SEC Eastern Division. I've looked at everybody in the SEC East, knocked out Alabama a couple days ago, and I will steamroll right through the rest of the SEC Western Division and on through the rest of the country. Follow me on Twitter at Mark Rogers TV. Again, Mark Rogers TV. Follow me on Twitter. We talk college football there 24/7, 365. And if you follow me, I will follow you, and we will talk some college football. And if for whatever reason I don't follow you, hey, give me a shout-out. Let me know, hey, Mark, I'm following you to talk some college football. Let's get after it, and we will do that. So right now, knocking out the schedules, we've knocked out top 5 positional players at every SEC position with Dr. SEC, also with Chad Niebling of SEC Sports Insider, and also Stephen A. Smith of Touchdown Alabama. Now here on the SEC in 60, we're going position by position, and I'm going to take on the burden of the offensive line all by myself today. So we'll see if we can make it through. And, of course, we always want to hear from you. We want your comments and your questions, your feedback. We want to hear from you. This is what it's all about. It's not just us talking. We set up this Google Hangout for you to tweet us, for you to jump on, for you to give us your comments and your feedback concerning our show, concerning the SEC, concerning college football. And we want to mix it up and have some fun with this. Again, it's the SEC in 60 every Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern and noon Central. I'm Mark Rogers, Mark Rogers TV. Follow me on Twitter. Subscribe to my YouTube channel as well, where I've got almost 800 college football videos. We talk about it all the time. You're not going to agree with me all the time, especially Alabama fans recently concerning their schedule. But we will mix it up when we talk about college football, and we like to delve deep beneath the surface, not just your standard SEC or college football talk, but we like to really break it down. We invite in some of the top bloggers across the country. You'll see over 40 bloggers from some of the top sites across the country on my site, and also talk to Arkansas State head coach Blake Anderson a few weeks ago to preview the Red Wolves for 2014 with another new head coach for that football program. That's 5 and 5 years for Arkansas State. We've also talked to a number of other head coaches around college football, and that's part of the platform as well. All right, let's talk about the Georgia Bulldogs coming off that disappointing 8-5 campaign. Realistically, you've got to give Mark Richt a break concerning all the injuries that this football team faced last season. It was Malcolm Mitchell in Game 1 against Clemson. it was really the entire wide receiver core was decimated. All the main guys were hurt at some point in the season. Arthur Lynch at tight end was the one mainstay for Aaron Murray in the passing game throughout the season, one of the best in the SEC, not coming back to Georgia this season, first team All-SEC tight end. Injuries in the wide receiver core. They lost the best running back in college football, Todd Gurley, after he was ripping through the LSU defense for like 75 yards on 7 carries, lost for about 4 games, never was the same, came back admirably with the ankle injury, gutted it out, and Todd Gurley finished off the season with almost 1,000 yards, caught 37 passes, 6 touchdowns receiving for Todd Gurley. That's how good he is. And if you saw most notably that bowl game against Nebraska, he just wasn't himself. He still almost ran for 100 yards in that game. But Todd Gurley on the shelf, his backup, Keith Marshall, who was one of the great freshmen in the SEC in 2012, lost to injury against Tennessee. They had their third-string running back, J.J. Green, run for 129 yards in that overtime win at Knoxville. So he got the bulk of the carries. He's most likely moving to the secondary with Gurley and possibly Marshall still reeling from injuries, but Gurley's in good shape. He's ready to go. Marshall, there's some question about his status for 2014, whether he's going to be completely healthy. But you got J.J. Green, you got Brendan Douglas, another running back who's a very workman-like running back who got the bulk of the carries in a big game against Missouri, the game that really separated the Tigers as the front runner in the SEC Eastern Division when James Franklin got hurt, but Matty Maw came in and they completed the wide receiver screen pass downfield for the touchdown that broke Georgia's backs and really decided the SEC Eastern Division. It's typically that Georgia-South Carolina game that really gives us that clear-cut favorite in the SEC East, or at least that's been the case in the last few years. Georgia did win that game last season, a great goal line stand that we'll talk about when we run through the defense, but then they, lost to Missouri, had the earlier loss to Clemson, which of course did not affect the SEC standings. So Georgia, 8-4 in the regular season, lost to Nebraska after giving up a 99-yard touchdown, having the final drive come down to the 15-yard line on a 4th down play, in which Arthur Lynch dropped the 4th down pass, well delivered by Hudson Mason, another guy we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. So Georgia finishes at 8-5, 5-3 in the SEC. Aaron Murray going down against Kentucky, the most prolific quarterback in the history of the school, and take into account David Green, Eric Zier, Fran Tarkenton, in days gone by, and of course Matthew Stafford as well there at Georgia. I think the one major key component in talking about the storylines for Georgia in the offseason was on the defense, with the defensive coordinator switch of Todd Grantham going to Louisville and Jeremy Pruitt coming in from Florida State. Was his job a remarkable job that he did with the Seminoles in 2013? I hear a lot of analysts really credit him for losing all that NFL defense from 2012 and putting together a national championship defense. I hear other people say, well, the pieces were in place. They had top 5 recruiting classes each and every year, and Jeremy Pruitt simply rolled the football out on the field and said, boys, go get them. Well, he definitely made some adjustments to that system, Jeremy Pruitt there in Tallahassee, and that defense was always talented, but against the better offenses they faced, most notably Clemson. Think about the Clemson performance for Jeremy Pruitt's defense last year. Clemson proved to be one of the top 5 offenses in college football. Taj Boyd, quarterback, Sammy Watkins, the running backs that they have, and Martavius Bryant, one of the most underachieving wide receivers in college football, and Florida State just put a whooping on them. Only 14 points given up. The last 7 were garbage points. So Jeremy Pruitt is an addition to this Georgia defense, and I think Georgia fans realize that and have really welcomed him with opening arms. Coming off a cold over the last week, so I'm feeling much better, but yeah, something got inside of me. So excuse the coughing for the next 50 minutes, but we'll get on through. Talking about Georgia's defense, Jeremy Pruitt considered to be a much better communicator and a better talent developer. So it's one thing to have the great talent like Georgia had a couple of years ago in 2012 with Jarvis Jones and company. That defense underachieved. Yeah, they came within 4 yards of a national championship game, but they gave up big yardage and big points and big plays throughout the season, despite moving all those players onto the NFL. Then they lose all those guys, and Grantham might have done a better coaching job with less talent last year, and certainly less experience in 2013, and Georgia played pretty well on defense, got gashed up a little bit, most notably by Missouri, and of course Clemson. But besides that, the Bulldogs played much better on defense in 2013 than even that 2012 squad. It was basically the offensive injuries that crippled this football team and led to 5 losses. Hudson Mason, a quarterback. He was a guy that we talked about last week here on SEC in 60. So check out episode 11, SEC in 60, for your take on Hudson Mason when we had Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama on to talk about Mason, who's waited all this time behind Aaron Murray. Hudson Mason's a senior. He knows the offense. Probably a blessing in disguise at this point that Murray was lost the second to last game of the regular season against Kentucky. Mason came in, preserved the win. Murray, to his credit, this guy's a pretty boy to a certain extent, and maybe gives off that persona, pocket passer, quarterback, good-looking guy, good-looking girlfriend, but he pulled through on that final drive against Kentucky. He knew he had the ACL, and if you watch the drive, go on YouTube, watch the Aaron Murray drive against Kentucky, his offensive line knew, hey, we need to keep Kentucky out of here because Murray's hurt. He's completing this drive. He did not want to leave senior night without delivering the touchdown pass and putting Georgia in a good position to win that game against the Wildcats. But again, Hudson Mason comes in against Kentucky, then plays the entire game against Georgia Tech. Looks awful early. Georgia's down 17-0. Brings back the Bulldogs to win at 30. I forget what the score was, 41-34, something like that. But down 17-0. Had nearly a 300-yard passing game against Georgia Tech's pretty good defense. A couple NFL players on that Yellow Jackets defense. And then, again, not a ton of points against Nebraska. Lose 24-19. But Hudson Mason delivered 320 yards and a touchdown pass against Nebraska. And who knows, it would have been nice to have seen him complete the drive against Nebraska, but had the dropped pass on 4th down by Arthur Lynch. And Hudson Mason's the quarterback. There's going to be a drop-off at quarterback play. There was a reason Aaron Murray was starting. Hudson Mason was not a freshman. He was all the way up to his junior season, backing up one of the better quarterbacks in college football. Hudson Mason's going to be a downgrade from Aaron Murray. And it's going to be noticeable, but I think he's going to acquit himself very well. I think he will be one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the conference. He's backed up possibly. Now, this is wide open, and if Hudson Mason's lost, then they really go to some inexperienced guys. Bryce Ramsey's a top 5 quarterback coming out of high school, and you got a sophomore, Jacob Park, and there's a possibility, Bryce Ramsey's going to be a sophomore coming up this fall, and Jacob Park, one of the stellar recruits for Mark Richt in 2014 in that class. Dual-threat quarterback. Ramsey more of a pocket passer, a la Mason and Murray. Dual-threat quarterback Jacob Park comes in this spring as well. So they've got inexperience behind Mason, so they're going to have to keep him upright and healthy. Malcolm Mitchell coming back at wide receiver from the ACL. He should be ready to go, along with Justin Scott-Wesley, Chris Conley. Malcolm Mitchell is the most talented of the wide receivers. The other guys are workmanlike guys, Conley and Scott-Wesley. I did rate Chris Conley as one of my top 5 wide receivers in the SEC. Check out that video along with, I believe, Dr. SEC and Chad Napling of SEC Sports Insider. So go to YouTube and check out my YouTube channel there with our top 5 SEC wide receivers. Chris Conley caught like 45 passes. Justin Scott-Wesley, the same thing. Conley very much impressed me against LSU. He made the big catches in that game for like 130 yards, couple touchdowns there. Really got Georgia back in the ball game against Georgia Tech again, down 17-0 and bailing out Hudson Mason in that game, and he was the go-to guy in that big comeback over rival Georgia Tech. It all revolves around Todd Gurley. He's healthy. Whether you're a Georgia fan or not, unless you're rooting maybe for South Carolina or Missouri or Florida, you want to see Gurley play a full season. Would love to see what he has. We last saw him completely healthy again against LSU, and he was tearing up the Tigers in Athens. And before that, for a full season, was that incredible 2012. And I know running back's more in an instinctive position. It's much more impressive to see, obviously, a quarterback come in, or most notably an offensive lineman come in and start in the SEC and play and perform and succeed. But even at running back, Todd Gurley was a monster, and he chewed up what was possibly the best defense in college football in the SEC championship game. So a healthy Todd Gurley for 13, or for Georgia's sake, 14 games in 2014 would be great to see, along again with Keith Marshall, kind of the forgotten man, but an 1,100-yard running back as a freshman at Georgia. Then, of course, we've got J.J. Green possibly in the mix and Brennan Douglas as well, and they recruited running backs there as well. The issue could be along the offensive line. So go back to 2012. They had youth along the offensive front that was really exposed by Clowney, Quarles, and Sutton against South Carolina. They lost that game 35-7, and that was kind of the wake-up call for this Georgia program in 2012. They got off the deck, and the offensive line really improved down the stretch. They became the highest-scoring offense in the SEC, completed the great run, took Alabama to the wire, won a bowl game, finished in the top 5. Then they had the offensive group coming back along the front last season. Canarius Gates got injured. He did play all the games, but he was hobbled up. He's the best offensive lineman that they lost going on to the NFL. But they lose 4 starters off this offensive line. So Will Friend, the offensive line coach at Georgia, has his hands full in patching together an offensive line. And yes, they've got the talent, they've got the recruits. That's definitely seen in the rankings, but they will have to put together an offensive line in front of Todd Gurley and company. As we mentioned, Arthur Lynch gone. The heir apparent is Jay Rome, caught like 9 passes last season, but he's a capable tight end. And they've really recruited at the tight end position as well, with a top recruit coming in 2014, Hugh Williams and Jordan Davis from previous classes backing up Jay Rome at tight end. When you talk Georgia football and separating Georgia from not quite reaching the elite of college football, it goes back to the defense. We saw it in 2012 most notably, and we talked about it. All that talent was lost from 2012, and they actually kind of improved in 2013. This linebacking core is exceptional. And another plug for a video is our top 5 SEC linebackers. So check that one out. I had Raemick Wilson ranked as the second best linebacker in the SEC behind Trey DePriest. First team All-American, first team All-SEC. Led the SEC with 133 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, 7 hurries at the quarterback, and that was his first year starting. He comes into a senior season, and he heads up this linebacking core that is really top-notch. One of the big reasons why this linebacking core is so good is, of course, recruiting. You got to have players. Number 2, linebacker coach Kurt Olivadotti, who has since moved on to the Washington Redskins, really coached these guys up. So you got Wilson, Leonard Floyd as a freshman in that new 3-4 scheme coming up with Jeremy Pruitt, but last season as a freshman had 55 total tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, 22 quarterback hurries. That was the top figure combined if you're looking at hurries in the SEC, and forced a couple fumbles. So we expect big things out of Leonard Floyd as well. Amarlo Herrera is a guy that racked up 112 tackles. That was 3rd in the SEC, and he very much impressed me with a goal line stop against South Carolina that saved the game when the Bulldogs were up by less than a touchdown in that football game. So that's the Georgia linebacking core. They also have Jordan Jenkins up front. He had 12.5 tackles for loss last season. The problem for Georgia this season is going to be in the secondary. They really need Damian Swann to bounce back. Damian Swann had an exceptional sophomore season. Then he was completely lost. There were times last year, I don't know what was on this kid's mind, that he was completely lost. He had all those starts under his belt, so it wasn't inexperienced, but blown coverages, getting burned, getting juked, getting double moved fairly consistently. Damian Swann will hit you, though. He is a sure tackler at 57 tackles last season. Again, big sophomore season out of Damian Swann. Down last year, just lost at times, didn't make the big plays that he made the previous season in leading this team to an Eastern Division championship on defense. So he's got to come back, because the story of this Georgia defense, and specifically the secondary, is all the talent they lost. Gone is sophomore safety Trey Matthews, gone to transfer to Auburn. He is the fourth secondary player from this Georgia football team in 2013 to transfer. Most of them chased Todd Grantham to Louisville. Talk about sophomore cornerback Shaq Wiggins. He transferred. And all these guys had substantial playing time. Josh Harvey Clements, he of the infamous tipped pass to Sammy Coates of Auburn, or that was Ricardo Lewis of Auburn, who caught the game-winning touchdown pass with 25 seconds left, 75-yard touchdown pass that was the latest in the miracle bag of the Auburn Tigers. But Josh Harvey Clements was the 2012 top recruit. He was dismissed due to violation of team rules. He's chased Grantham to Louisville. Now it's Matthews, who was earlier this spring arrested and charged with theft back in March, has transferred to Auburn. So they lose 4 defensive backs. 3 of them were substantial contributors, including, again, Matthews being the latest. As a freshman, had 8 games, 6 games started, 36 total tackles, a pick, and a forced fumble, and he was hobbled by an injury to his hamstring most of this season, but improved greatly, had a great spring. Then he gets kicked off the football team, dismissed, and hightails it to the Auburn Tigers, kind of a la Nick Marshall. So you got Damian Swann. He's got to have a big year as the veteran and leader of this group. Georgia fans, if you know anything specifically about J.J. Green, will he carry the football on offense? But if Gurley's healthy, and if Marshall's healthy, and they've got Brennan Douglas, certainly a great third option, a workman-like back, do they need J.J. Green on offense? And considering all the losses to this secondary, I would think that they need J.J. Green to play defensive back this year. And he was a playmaker during the spring at DB. So I think I've answered my question for me. He made all the plays during the spring. The reports are that J.J. Green was the best defensive back on the field for this football team in the spring. That's after running for almost 400 yards, including a $129 against Tennessee last season, and 3 touchdowns. Tramel Terry's in the mix, and at safety, Corey Moore, who had 7 starts last season, 35 tackles, 3 picks, tackle for loss, and a sack. Quincy Mauger, also with 57 tackles and a tackle for loss. Quincy Mauger will have to factor into this defense and be an impact player at safety. Anything else we'd like to note here? Michael Bennett is another guy, along with Conley, Malcolm Mitchell, who will be a player for this team that was ravaged by injuries last season. All right, the Georgia Bulldogs at 8-5, coming off a 5-3 SEC campaign. Of course, it just doesn't seem to have worked out for Mark Richt. Yeah, it's worked out. He's got an SEC contender. He's doing just fine, making plenty of money, winning plenty of ball games. But when it comes to those opportunities to win huge, to grab that SEC championship, which he's done a couple times, 2002, the SEC title win against Arkansas. He beat LSU in a title game earlier in the decade as well. That 2007 Georgia team, many thought were one of the best football teams in the country, that completely annihilated Hawaii in the Sugar Bowl. But that 2012, boy, that was the golden moment. The window was open, then it closed rather quickly. Then he gets hit with the injuries when it looked like this football team was going to challenge Alabama for the SEC last season. Auburn jumps out of nowhere, and Georgia's nowhere to be found because of all the offensive injuries. And I think that the offensive injuries that this team faced last season were the worst I've ever seen. When you're talking about your 2 best running backs, your 3 best wide receivers at some point being lost during the season. And then again, they didn't lose starts along the offensive line, but most of their offensive linemen were nicked at some point during the season. Excuse me. So we look at the Georgia schedule for 2014, and so they get the return trip from Clemson. So they lose that one 35-31 at Clemson last season. Tosh Boyd gone, Sammy Watkins gone. Vic Beasley and a very much improved Clemson defense show up in Athens. So that's a huge challenge right out of the gate. We expect Clemson to be a top 15 to top 20 team, not quite what they were on offense last season, breaking in the new quarterback. But the Clemson defense will be better, should be better than it was last season, and that group got pretty good during the stretch drive. So Georgia gears up for Clemson. Then they've got the open date. Then it's South Carolina. So they get hit just like they did last year with the first 2 games, Clemson, and then their biggest rival in the SEC right now, the team that has been the best team in the Eastern Division, despite really not winning the Eastern Division championship overall with 3 consecutive 11-2 campaigns. South Carolina, kind of the standard in the SEC Eastern Division right now. So the Bulldogs have to go to Columbia in week 3 for that second game. Then they get a bit of a break against Troy. They've got Tennessee, they got Vandy, they got Missouri. So that's a key stretch to hold serve. They're going to be a favorite in all of those games. They've got to go to Mizzou, though. And, of course, they lost that game against the Tigers in Athens this past season. So the 2 non-division games, and if you hear me break down schedules here on Mark Rogers TV, I like to look at the non-division games because we know everybody's playing their division foes. So who these teams play in the SEC in the other division is huge to success. Arkansas is one of the games. So Mark Richt couldn't have picked that one better himself. The other game, of course, is the cross-division rivalry with Auburn. So they always play the Tigers, and they've got the game in Athens. So Clemson in game 1, open week, South Carolina. That's going to determine the front runner in the SEC Eastern Division because I think those are the 2 best teams in the East, South Carolina and Georgia. Troy out of conference, got to win that game. Got to hold serve with Tennessee and Vandy at home, Missouri on the road. That is key to the Bulldogs' efforts in 2014 as well. Arkansas should be a win, although that game's on the road, and the Hogs did play everybody tough, excluding South Carolina, at home last year. Another open date. Then the stretch drive is not that daunting. This Georgia team should be a solid favorite against Florida in Jacksonville. Then they've got Kentucky. Their one game that they will be most likely a decided underdog will be November 15th, even at home against Auburn. Charleston Southern, Georgia Tech. So Georgia should go 10-2 against this schedule right here. Possibly 9-3 if they lose all the big games against Clemson, South Carolina, and Auburn. But 10-2 minimum. We will have our official pick later in the summer for the Georgia Bulldogs. So please, Bulldog fans, you know your football team, chime in. Let us know what we don't know about Georgia football, and we'll talk about the Bulldogs as well. Would like to remind you what we've got going on Mark Rogers TV. Again, we have rated the top 5 at every position in the SEC. We have also run down the top 10 at every position in college football. Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, offensive line, defensive line. We're working on the linebackers, so we're going to finish up linebackers, safeties, cornerbacks, punters, and kickers. Can't forget those guys. They decide football games sometimes. And then we're going to rate our top 10 coaches in college football and our coaches 1 through 14 in the SEC. So that's going to raise some eyebrows, and that should create some conversation when we talk about so-and-so is the 13th best coach in the SEC, is the second to worst coach in the SEC. So that's a no-win situation when you start to rank guys 1 through 14 because somebody's got to be near the bottom. Also have a series going that we mentioned off the top where we're going through every schedule for every Power 5 conference team. We've knocked out the SEC East and Alabama. So that's 8 down. That's about 60 to go. So we've got our work cut out for us there, but we'll knock out the rest of the SEC later this week. All right, let's talk about the top 5 offensive linemen in the SEC. We did a video on this with Dr. SEC, Peter Flournoy, and also Chad Niebling of SEC Sports Insider. All right, here's my top 5. Number 5, Laramie Tunsil out of Ole Miss, left tackle. What's so impressive about this guy is that he came in as a marked man. The number 1 offensive line recruit coming out of high school, out of that stellar recruiting class from Hugh Freeze, where they picked up Laquan Treadwell. And again, the number 1 cornerback, the number 1 safety, the number 1 offensive tackle, and the number 1 wide receiver. And then we're forgetting Robert Kimdichie, the number 1 defensive lineman and number 1 overall recruit. Okay, Tunsil's performance was exceptional. 9 starts. He got his first start against Jackson Jeffcoat. If you don't know much about the Big 12 or Texas football, Jackson Jeffcoat was a 5-star recruit who probably underachieved at Texas, but at the same time had a strong career. He's in an NFL camp right now. And Laramie Tunsil, in his first start in the SEC at Ole Miss against Jackson Jeffcoat on the road at Texas, stonewalled him. Stone cold, stopped him. Nothing out of Jackson Jeffcoat in that game. Ole Miss won it big by 3 touchdowns. He was a freshman All-America. He was second-team All-SEC. He gave up 1 sack against the best league and the best speed rushers in college football. And so I just figure with another spring and another summer under his belt, learning better technique, most importantly in the passing game and pass protection, that Laramie Tunsil is going to be a stud, even more so than he is right now. I still have him at number 5. That's how good this group is. At number 4 in the SEC along the offensive front, I've got Texas A&M's Cedric Obuhai. And if I have pronounced that incorrectly, I'm going to find out on opening night. Hopefully, they say some offensive linemen's names during the broadcast. Sometimes they don't. But this guy could have gone to the NFL. And sure, a lot of guys could go to the NFL, but in Cedric O's case, the NFL Draft Advisory Board said, "Kid, you're a first-round pick. Come on out." Cedric O determined to go to Texas A&M, go back to school, move to left tackle. So this is a recurring pattern that we see, which is what a pattern is, where guards move to right tackles move to left tackle, and then they get picked really high in the NFL draft. Luke Jokel, Jake Matthews, and now Cedric Obuhai moved from guard to right tackle to left tackle, and Cedric O, now the left tackle, going to be protecting a quarterback that we're going to talk about in just a minute as part of our X Factor portion of the show with the Texas A&M quarterback situation minus Johnny Manziel. So back to this guy. He's a monster. He's the most talented kid on this board, Cedric O. So at left tackle for Texas A&M, the number 3 ranked SEC offensive lineman. At number 3, center, Reese Mukes out of Auburn. I wanted to get a center in here. Got Ryan Kelly at Alabama. He could eke into the top 5 at some point during this season after his performance, and it's strange to see that we don't have an Alabama player represented in the top 5 in the SEC. But I go with Dismukes at number 3 out of Auburn. He led the number 1 rushing attack in college football, the best in the nation, against the best defenses, still grinding out the best rushing performance, yards per game in the country. I think that's a phenomenal stat. The number 1 rushing offense is typically Air Force, or Navy, because of the schedule and because of the lack of a passing attack and because of the scheme. Auburn did it against the SEC. Even in facing Florida State in the championship game, they came out with the best numbers in the rushing game. Now we know Robinson moved on to the NFL and the St. Louis Rams. Now he would be given the most credit for that rushing success along the offensive line. Keep in mind, though, that Dismukes makes the line calls. He's a 4-year starter at center. He's a smart player. He knows his stuff. He gets the offensive line set, and he is the quarterback or leader along the offensive front. A 4-year starter, Reese Dismukes, number 3 in the SEC. At number 2, I got A.J. Cann of South Carolina. South Carolina could prove to have the best overall offensive line in the SEC this season in leading Heisman Trophy candidate Mike Davis. They're going to have to pass protect because they don't have the mobility of Connor Shaw this season at quarterback. Dylan Thompson can move around. It's not like he's Drew Bledsoe in the pocket, but at the same time, Dylan Thompson, not Connor Shaw, not going to make plays with his feet. He's going to move around. He can take off. He's not a statue, but the pass protection factor is heightened this season at South Carolina, and the left tackle is A.J. Cann with 38 starts. He's a senior. He teams with a guy that could be in his top 5, could definitely have Corey Robinson, the left guard at South Carolina, ranked in the top 5. Spurrier raves about A.J. Cann, his work ethic, his leadership, his technique, his professionalism as a college football player. Left tackle, South Carolina, A.J. Cann, number 2 in the SEC. This list is so bunched up, so it's not like this guy's number 1, there's a drop-off, and then we've got a bunch of other guys. Or there's a drop-off at number 3. These guys, I've got them sized down. Tunsil might be the most talented at number 5. If you combine talent and technique, I'd say Cedric Obuhai of Texas A&M would be the most complete guy and the best NFL prospect at this point. Dismukes is the smart center, the guy that gets everybody in place, the guy that makes the line calls and could have went to the NFL draft. Again, Cann and Robinson make up a great left side for South Carolina. At number 1, I'm going with La'el Collins out of LSU. 6'5", 315. 26 consecutive starts the past 2 seasons at LSU. Road grader, a senior who leads that LSU rushing attack that featured Jeremy Hill. Just check out the Outback Bowl against a very stout front 7 at Iowa. And we may not give teams out of the Big Ten or other conferences much credit for talent, but that Iowa team in the front 7 was very good on defense, and Jeremy Hill had a field day. La'el Collins paved the way for much of that 200 yards for Jeremy Hill, because despite Jeremy Hill's talent, plug anybody into that LSU backfield in the last few years, including Terrence McGee, Alfred Blue, Kenny Hilliard. Everybody ran for big yardage against really good defenses. Start with Game 1 last season against TCU at Texas Stadium, or whatever they call that place, Jerry's World. And LSU ran the football very effectively with 3 running backs, and Jeremy Hill suspended with 3 other running backs, Blue, McGee, and Hilliard. They all ran for 90, 95 yards. La'el Collins makes the LSU running game really special. He is determined. He's a road grader. He is a monster in the running game. And he got much better as a pass protector last season as Cam Cameron's offense opened things up with Zach Mettenberger throwing the football. And so La'el Collins, just strictly out of repetition in practice and then in game situations, became a better pass protector, much improved in the passing game. La'el Collins, the senior out of LSU, is number 1. So again, our top 5 offensive linemen in the SEC. Laramie Tunsil, Ole Miss at number 5. Number 4, Cedric Obuhai out of Texas A&M. Reese Dismukes, number 3 out of Auburn. A.J. Cann, South Carolina, number 2. And number 1 is La'el Collins out of LSU, the left tackle in Baton Rouge. Other guys to make note of, and again, we cut a top 5 offensive lineman video with Dr. SEC and Chad Niebling of SEC Sports Insider. So these guys were mentioned as well. The center out of Alabama, Ryan Kelly, we talked about him. Dylan Day, Mississippi State. The Bulldogs will be much improved this season. They'll be a factor in the SEC Western Division. David Andrews of Georgia. Chaz Green out of Florida, the tackle there. Denver Kirkland started as a freshman in Fayetteville. And Corey Robinson, we mentioned him with South Carolina. Keep in mind that the entire first-team All-SEC team gone from last season along the offensive front, and most of the second team. most notably Jake Matthews and Robinson going to the St. Louis Rams. So that's our top 5 offensive linemen. Now let's talk X Factor. So we started an X Factor series last week looking at Hudson Mason replacing Aaron Murray at quarterback at Georgia. Johnny Manziel was pretty good at Texas A&M, won a Heisman Trophy, put together a highlight reel almost unmatched in the history of college football at quarterback. Johnny Manziel gone. The biggest news coming out of the quarterback ranks in Texas A&M this spring actually involved a couple of situations that won't involve this team this spring. And that's 2015 commit Kyler Murray, the number 1 rated passer coming out of high school going into a senior season. Kyler Murray, 2015 recruit, so he may vie for the starting job in 2015. And then you've got Matt Jokel transferring to TCU. It's kind of interesting with Manziel out of the way that Jokel transfers to TCU when the competition is wide open. So what this leaves Kevin Sumlin is 2 quarterbacks vying for the job with no experience, basically no experience. The front runner at this point is the pocket passer, Kyle Allen. He's a true freshman. Excuse me. He is an early enrollee, so he's gotten the reps in spring ball, played very well in the spring. True freshman out of Scottsdale, Arizona. He can move around. He can run. He is not a dual-threat quarterback, Tim Tebow, Braxton Miller. But he can move around at 6'3", 220. Number 1 quarterback, according to the composite rankings at 24/7 Sports. I'm kind of curious. I would be interested to see his interceptions in high school, because usually when a guy is rated the number 1 quarterback, and especially the number 1 rated pocket passer, their statistics in high school are mind-boggling. This guy had some issues. 29 touchdowns, 10 picks as a senior, so the ratio is not exceptional. He threw 36 touchdowns as a junior, so 29 to 10 touchdown to pick ratio, not exceptional in high school, but he's got a strong arm, of course. He's very accurate, and they say that he's very accurate on the move. A quarterback at his stage of development who's already accurate in turning the shoulders, making sure he's got his target set, and throwing the football with great technique on the move. Very impressive. Texas A&M's got an advantage here in developing quarterbacks with Kevin Sumlin. He did it all his days at Houston. And before that, he's made a name and got this Texas A&M head coaching job based primarily on motivating kids, recruiting, and number 3, developing quarterbacks. It didn't seem like he developed Johnny Manziel. Oh, Johnny Manziel just runs out there and makes plays. Kevin Sumlin worked with Johnny Manziel. He was ready for the NFL draft and shows great technique at the combine and in his workouts, mainly because of Kevin Sumlin and his development of quarterbacks. He had a true freshman at Houston back in 2010, David Pyland, who, lesser competition, let's keep in mind, of course, averaged 330 yards per game as a true freshman, 24 touchdowns and 14 picks. So Kevin Sumlin is going to work with these quarterbacks, already has. So I think a key issue in this situation with Kyle Allen is that coaches have more time to work with players during the summer. So Kevin Sumlin had more oversight with Kyle Allen in particular and Kenny Hill than other coaches have had in the past. So that gives him much of an advantage in trying to really cram together and piece together this quarterback situation from a lot of inexperience, a lot of talent, but a lot of inexperience. Let's look at the other candidate, probably the guy in the second spot in the depth chart right now, Kenny Hill, 6'2", 210, dual threat quarterback, 16 of 22 last year, 183 yards and a touchdown pass with no picks. What really hurts him here, I don't know how much Kevin Sumlin's going to weigh this. He was suspended during spring practice. Now, at that point, it was considered that Kyle Allen and Kenny Hill were neck and neck. Kyle Allen didn't get into trouble, stayed on the field, completed his spring practice, and now as a true freshman goes into summer reps. Kenny Hill suspended due to public intoxication, apparently passing out for all to see at College Station outside a bar, so he was suspended for the rest of spring practice. That said, he's been reinstated. He's going through his reps during the summer, and he's ready to go for fall camp to compete for the job. But he's got some catching up to do. 4-star recruit, number 8 recruited dual threat quarterback, is rated by 24/7 Sports. 2011 Texas 5A state champion. Texas high school football is unmatched across the country, not in terms of talent. The talent in Florida and California matches Texas. But in terms of the time and attention given to Texas high school football, the crowds, the atmosphere, the pressure is high. So to win a state championship at that level in Texas, 5A, Class 5A football, means something when we talk about Kenny Hill. And keep in mind, even though he just got the 22 passes in game action last season in replacing Johnny Manziel against Rice in that infamous suspended game in the opener, he also shared second-team snaps in practice with Jokel. So Kenny Hill's got much more experience than Kyle Allen, but Kyle Allen seems to be doing the right things. It's going to be interesting because these are two different type quarterbacks. Is Kevin Sumlin going to go with a pocket passer who can move? He's not a statue. Kyle Allen, the pocket passer, or is he very comfortable with that Johnny Manziel type guy in Kenny Hill, the dual threat quarterback? Kyler Murray is a dual threat quarterback who's the future at Texas A&M, and he's dual threat. So does he want to stay continuously with a dual threat option at quarterback, not change the offense, not change the playbook much, and stay with Kenny Hill and take it from Manziel to Hill to Murray? Or is he going to give Kyle Allen the true shot, who seems to be the number one guy in the depth chart right now at Texas A&M? All right, so we've talked Georgia football, we've talked Texas A&M quarterback situation, and our top 5 offensive line in the SEC. Would love to hear from you. Please send us your comments. Please check out my YouTube channel at Mark Rogers TV, where I've got almost 800 college football videos. And again, right now, what we're working on are top 10 at every position in college football. We've wrapped up the top 5 at every position in the SEC. We are going to carve through every schedule in Power 5 conference football. It's like 70 teams. We've knocked out 8. We've got like 60 to go. So please check out those, because I'm a bit hard on some teams, most notably Vandy and Alabama. Don't like the schedules, don't like the schedule strategy on the non-conference slate for either the Commodores or the Crimson Tide. So we hope to have either Chad Niebling of SEC Sports Insider or most likely Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama back with us in SEC in 60 next Monday. Remember, we've only got 7 weeks to football, so we've got a lot to talk about coming up on 2014. So please join us every Monday on Google Hangouts, 1 o'clock Eastern, noon Central. Then what we do is we turn this thing around and offer it as a podcast. So go to iTunes and search Mark Rogers TV, and you will find all our SEC in 60 shows. You will also follow and find my other podcast, Mark Rogers TV's College Football Podcast. We're looking for a name, so if you've got a name for us, please suggest a name for our other podcast that we release every Friday, looking at the other conferences in college football. So again, iTunes, SEC in 60, or Mark Rogers TV, and you will find the other SEC in 60 shows where we go through all the top 5 lists of every position in the SEC, all the news, all the highlights, everything that you could imagine in prepping you for the 2014 SEC season. So for Chad Niebling of SEC Sports Insider and also Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama, I'm Mark Rogers, and we had a great time and made it through the coughing and made it through to talk SEC for 60 minutes every Monday, at least 60 minutes for you of SEC in football. Have a great week.